Good evening. Welcome to this evening's lecture. I'm very, very happy to welcome as a participant in the series Antoni Muntadas. As I can tell by the crowd, some of you are familiar with his work, and I thought it would be a very good opportunity for us to be able to experience his description of his recent projects that he's been engaged in. Perhaps you know that he has recently had two retrospectives, one in Madrid at the Reina, Sofía, and another one that was in the Bronx Museum in New York. He's one of the pioneers of conceptual work from Catalonia and has been living in the United States and other parts of the world, but here based since the 1970s. And I'm just going to say a few words about his work. Muntadas' work addresses social, political, and communications issues, such as the relationship between public and private space within social frameworks, and investigates channels of information and the ways these may be used to censor or promulgate ideas. His projects are presented in different media, such as photography, video, publications, the internet, installations, and urban interventions. Muntadas has received numerous awards and grants. His work has been exhibited extensively at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Musée d'Art Contemporaine in Montreal, Berkeley Art Museum, Museo de Arte Moderno, Buenos Aires, the Pinacoteca de São Paulo, Brazil, in the 6th and 10th editions of Documenta, Kassel, the Whitney Biennial of American Art in New York, and the 51st Venice Biennial. Most recently, as I was mentioning, he exhibited at NCCA in Moscow, in Russia, and also at the Bronx Museum and the Museo Nacional, Centro de Arte Reina, Sofía. With no further ado, I welcome Antoni Muntadas.
We switch to. Okay, thank you, Reina. It's always interesting to talk and present work here at MIT. Feel always things changing, the space change, you change, and I hope myself too. But that the work today I wanted to present is under these two words, protocols and project. I feel these two words are a kind of parenthesis to encapsulate certain projects that I've been doing through the years. I will say, and also in a way, the description brings that we are based very much on vocabulary, and this vocabulary change through the times and sometimes the context. Like that, I think protocols we understand is a series of rituals, a series of ceremonies, of conventions, of agreements that happen from the perspective of politics, from the perspective of medicine, from the perspective of the social, from the perspective of the cultural, from bureaucracy, for diplomatic elements, from education. I think the areas they cover protocols and also has to do with the different countries. I think in every country, the word protocol, it has another significance. From the medicine in some ways, some control, if we go through the Stasi archive in East Berlin to the Oriental Wall, I think in general, this terrain and the universe of the protocol is as a series of rules that I feel, in a way, society is constructing to organize and, in certain way, to live sometimes with certain order, and sometimes I think it's important to consider that the protocols should be break and the protocols should change. Then the word project, that I think is a term that in the context of MIT is always, I mean, you see that it's a very common word to say, especially in the architecture. I think in architecture, the project is the base of the work. Everything is based on projects. I would say for artists, I think recently, I would say the last generation of people, we start to work on the idea of the project versus more object-oriented or a kind of immediate thing. I think we incorporate time and research that I think is something that, well, the traditional artists, it was not working so much. And I think in my case, I feel that I like to use projects to deconstruct the protocols. I will say in a way that these series of questions that I make myself, I think are in a way the reasons or motivations for what you are creating a project, but how you do it, the project, what you're doing, that I think is important, but also the time specificity, and finally the audience and the public. And I think this is some concerns that I think a long-term project requires. Finally, where the budget comes from. I tried to generate certain projects also linked to Boston for the period I've been. In 78, 77, I was invited by Otto Pine to come at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies and to give a lecture. As a result, I was invited to be a research fellow for several years. It was a very interesting period, and especially because I was not teaching, I was researching. I think it was a luxury, in a way, to have all the time and to have. Now we are in a situation, both things are happen. I think it's great. I think also it was a question in the beginning that I was introducing on the teaching process slowly. And at that time, I was working on the concept of media landscape. The media landscape as another window, another landscape that are looking of the window and looking more like the screen. And a series of work produced under that period, ones before MIT, others in developing here. These two landscapes, in a way, both real, start to originate a series of considerations and interdisciplinary works around here, and an observation of the media and how the media tried to construct this landscape. In a way, for me, it was a try to observe and analyze and try to understand between the two landscapes. I think it was also a search of objectivity, trying to understand the media as a possible objective process. And in general, I will arrive to the conclusion that this objectivity, it was inexistent. A series of work like the last 10 minutes where I analyzed the last minutes of television. Obviously, this work now it don't make any sense, but because it's not signed off. Television is 24 hours. But at that period, it was very interesting because you see that the end of television, it was a moment of propaganda. It was religion, national anthems, where people are kind of sleepy, their information, it goes in a very subtle way. On subjectivity was generated from the beginning here at MIT, and in a way it was to accept subjectivity. After the search of objectivity, I decide, and also in relationship with the science people here, then one of the reasons for me was interesting here is to be seen from the interdisciplinary point of view, if the science, they have a much more objective views. And the conclusion is in both cases, I think the situation is subjectivity. Subjectivity of facts, but finally it's an interpretation of these facts. And I decided to create a project that imply image, the image from Life magazine. And the result, it was a book and a videotape, part of an installation. And it was produced at the Hayden Gallery at that time. Now it's called Liszt, and it was in another building. And the idea to use Life magazine, because I think it was, for me, a source of image, the historical. I remember to see it in Spain, and in the 60s, it was a kind of international landscape of image that Life it was producing in certain way as a great quality of photographs by different photographers, but also it was a certain kind of introduction to information, but in certain case of propaganda. Propaganda of American way of life. It was the construction of the 50s, 60s information around the world. It was transmitted through Life magazine. That I selected 50 photographs of Life magazine, and I tried to do like a kind of anthropological research, but the method of the project, it was totally using the mail. I would say now this project in time of internet, it will be probably not sense, but at that time, mail art, it was very active. Active especially in countries like Russia, like East European countries, Latin America, where people were isolated, artists communicated through mail. That in this case, it was generated the chain of sending one photograph with a letter asking for a caption. The result is a book where the photographs in the right are complemented by the captions of 5 people around the world. They send me and I reproduce as a facsimile of the interpretation of this image. That the subjectivity of interpretation by the context or by the way how the information of every person, for me, it was an interesting reaffirmation of this idea of interpretation, subjectivity, and in a way, translation. The 50 photographs with the caption, it was complement with the list of the photographers that made these photographs and the people they contribute, 250 people. And in a way, the book and the project was finished when everybody who contributed to the book received a copy. Then the circle is closed in the way how people could understand what this contribution it was generated, to ask for a caption, receiving a photograph, and that the presentation, it was the videotape in one side and the other, the pages of the book. And as I mentioned before, as an anthropological situation of the image, considering the image like artifacts to be kind of dissected or analyzed. In 1999, I produced what I call an interrom. An interrom, a mixture between a CD and an internet project. And the internet project, it was about media, about hybrid spaces. And the DVD, it was about the media architecture installations. This media architecture installation that it was generated from in the decade of the 80s are works that it takes in consideration architecture, I mean, a space, a room, a boardroom, and implement some media creating a certain kind of metaphor. Obviously, the metaphor here is related and based on the Last Supper. And the work is about the relationship between religion, media, and economy. The spectrum of religion in the 80s. I will say that also was generated in Boston. It was through a grant of the Massachusetts Council for the Arts and based on the Mass College of Art. It was producing during 6 months with the students there, with some help, and it was a lot of research and a lot of construction of the work. Now it's in the National Gallery in Ottawa, in Canada. The work, it has the spectrum, as I say, Schuller, Oral Roberts, Reverend Ike, Moon, the Pope, different televangelists or people that deal with religion from the different cults and perspective. Obviously, Snilson, the Pope, and everybody has a monitor in the mouth with their own speeches and their own discourses. The room, in a way, is a kind of a space of a president room or a room with a board decision making, but from a perspective different than what in general a boardroom is. I think the media aspect and the implementation with lighting, creating a certain kind of dramatic situation. From that series of the media architecture installation, the stadium, it was also a project that it was produced in Banff in Canada. It took me, and when I say the concept for project, because all these projects start to generate at a period of time, I mean, 3 years, 4 years. It's never been done in a short, but they are open. They are open to different versions. Every time the stadium is presented, it changes. It changes with the context, and it changes with a different kind of interpretation. For me, the stadium, it was important because I consider in the cities, middle big cities, that you have museums for high art, but then you have the stadiums for popular culture. And the stadiums are, in a way, coming from the Romans and Greek and the tradition, becomes a place where you located a spectacle, but also the audience could be manipulated. Like that, the work is a large size scale maquette to analyze the factum of the stadium with projections and the sound and the elements, constructed elements. And as I said before, every stadium, now is the 15th, the last one, is being presented in different places with originated elements on the projection from different places. In Berlin, it was emphasized on the 30s, where Hitler was using the image, using the stadium as propaganda with all the games, or in the places where it was Barcelona in relationship with the Olympics, there, or events that it has to do with the context. I think sometimes to realize that the context requires certain kind of information and people or audience could understand in a better way. This is a work that it was not generated here, but it was presented at the list actually at the end. It took me 10 years to do this work. It was part of the that series I mentioned before, but it's more like a zoom in the context of art. I was interested to see, and I think this is a product of the 80s in a way that the system of art start to be exploding, the economics, the power of the roles. Like that, I decided to do an observation to an itinerary in the system between the people that are, between the artists and the audience. The dealers, the collectors, the gallery, the museums, the docents, the critics, the media, and the epilogue. Obviously, if that work is supposed to be now, it could be at other chapters. It could be the auctions, it could be the fairs, and maybe it could be adding the auctions, the fairs, and the biennales, for example. Anyway, the space, it has this kind of, the idea of forum, but in a way it's a kind of reverse panopticon, where the audience, you could observe all these cells, and the cells, in each cell is a different chapter. And the chapter is a compilation of interviews, 150 interviews. The collectors, it was juxtaposed with the image of the stock exchange in Japan. The critics with the waves in California. The train in Vancouver for the, I mean, it has a certain kind of metaphorical what I call open visuals to relate it to these interviews. Then finally, it was the different personalities or entities they could inform on the project. The press conference room is also another project in this series of media architecture installation where we know, everybody knows what a press conference is. You have somebody, it's a presenter or leader giving a kind of press conference. And the microphones as an important element of transmission. And in a way, was a kind of chain of the press, like a kind of media carpet, moving from the podium to the television set where you have a lot of politicians in a kind of historical, a contextual situation, and the soundtrack come in a kind of deconstructed way. In the beginning you could hear the sound, but then slowly overlap to deconstruct, and from the ceiling. I mean the high volume from the ceiling. And close to finish the series of the architecture media installations, the file room, based on another architecture elements that are the archive. In this case, it was created in Chicago through an alternative space that now disappeared. This is sadly a situation with I consider myself a product of the alternative spaces. I think when I arrived in New York in the 70s, galleries and museums, it was inaccessible. But we created the alternative spaces because they needed to show, and they needed to do is to build a chain of alternative spaces, and also in Canada that. And I think this is we are a generation that I think we own a lot of debit for that chain, you know. And it's too bad when I hear that an alternative space is closing. Anyway, the Randolph Street in Chicago was one of the all asked me to produce a work, and I was recovering for a case of censorship in Spain with the television. They asked me a program, and then after 2 years of working, it was censored. Like that, I decided that I created a file room, archives about cultural censorship. And at that time in Chicago, he was exploring the University of Illinois, the mosaic. And I think it was an interesting moment for me in terms that in instant to created a book or created a hypermedia, this is what I was thinking, to go to an open archive where it could be generated open and it could be filled with the contributions of the different people, the viewers or the participants. Like that, the work is based on, this is a 94 diagram. People in the media lab here, they probably, everybody horrified by this kind of, but I always wanted to keep this aesthetic. People were, now the file room is in the National Coalition Against Censorship, and they tell me, you should change that. I say, no, sorry, I keep it the same look. Like that, the file room is still alive, is still receiving cases of censorship from the perspective of the culture, from painting and sculpture to digital media, music, text, etc., and in different parts of the world, and by different reasons of censorship. In a way, to see how the subjectivity of censorship and how every country, every context is dealing in a situation that exercise power through the executive, the situation of the censorship. And a little bit after to finish with the file room, I start to think, and after working between the frames, that the issues of translation, it was start to interest me, not from the perspective of language to language, but to see that we live in a translation world. That we have filters, cultural filters, social filters, political filters, but everything is translated. And I start to generate a series of work. The first it was in Finland for Ars 95, the pavilion. And in Atlanta, I was one of the early ones too, because till now it's 41 projects. In a way, this series, it was created also to have the possibility to work with more flexibility than the previous projects. The previous project that maybe take me 5 years, 10 years, I was reacting more to the subject in a much more, as I say, flexible way. It means that sometimes I could do a project in shorter time, and it will be using a medium different, and it could be using a certain kind of, I was ready to react faster. Anyway, the games in Atlanta, it was based on the Olympic Games, and I think Olympic Games as a translated event, I dedicate to the simultaneous translator, the personnel that are always invisible and located in the middle of the space and try to, in oversized space for the, normally, actually, the translators are working in a hidden, very difficult rooms that nobody see and totally in the very bad conditions. Even it was is an image, I wanted this image becomes very kind of generous. And the translator, it was speaking in Vietnamese because it was the smaller group of people that represent the representation in the Olympics of Vietnam. It was 3 people. I dedicated to these 3 people the possibility to hear in direct. And for English-speaking people, they needed to listen for headphones. Some things the Americans very rarely do, especially in their own country. Like that, the work, it was also complemented with a series of bulletin boards that it was active during the time of the exhibition by myself and other people. They contributed. It was 16 bulletin boards. Okay, la mesa de negociación, that it was generated in Madrid, is maybe the more objectual of all the works. Even it has a series of elements that is composed by 12 pieces of the table with different style, different wood, coming from different parts of the world, and cut the legs in an asymmetrical way, and making the balance through books. The work is about the translation between maps of the world, about information, technology, distribution of wealth, and it kind of created a kind of map of the world, partially by different parts of geopolitical, geographical situations, and in a way, these maps are related to the books, and they have a kind of, the table becomes the filter of translation. Another work then is more, rarely I work in an image. This is one of the few works that it has an image because in a way it's a proposition for a kind of performance. In a way it's a proposal to act. The work, it was produced for a disaffected bank in New York, where a young group of people, artists, they decide to use the headquarters of a bank, then it was not in use, and to propose people to do works about economics and the bank. That this image, it was there in a kind of stereotype of what image in the banks are, but with a proposal to say, well, let's go to see how long it will take a quantity of money to disappear through translating to series of exchanges. And I think the translation Conmemoraciones Urbanas is referred to much a series of public works that I've been doing, and I think, as I said before, I'm selecting certain works. The only work I would like to talk with more extensive is the last one, because it's the recent. And Conmemoraciones Urbanas, it was following an invitation at Arte Cidade. Then Arte Cidade happened every period of time. It's interesting because after the biennales and triennales and all the things, it started to be a lot of events that people decide to construct with no periodicity. They do what they wanted to do. They do when they have the energy, the issues, and the money, and not necessarily to go for 2 years or 3 years. They happen in Medellin, in Colombia, Los Encuentros de Medellín. It happened in Arte Cidade, and I think it's much more organic and more real than necessary of the Biennale or Triennale, that it becomes institutional in the way to do it because you need to do it. I think the Arte Cidade, it's happened 3. The last, it was architects and artists, to work in an area of Sao Paulo, Zona Leste. And the result, it was 12 podiums like that in an informational space, where it explained where the project it was in the public space. I collaborate with Paula Santoro, an architect for Sao Paulo. Obviously, she knows better than me the city. Even since '75, I've been currently to go to Sao Paulo to teach and work like that. I am familiar with Sao Paulo, but I think it was this kind of project. I think it was the wish and the need to work in collaboration with the architect. And with Paula, we decide that our project will be to seeing the different parts of Arte, of the Zona Leste, and to see in the master plan what happened in that area. We arrived to the conclusion that the project was to install 11 bronze plates And these bronze plates, it was referring to propositions the mayor or the governor made for changes, but they never happened. In a way, it was a commemoration to urban disasters. And it was emphasized that these different plates, it was in places where interventions by the city, it was with the money assigned and with everything, never happened. That it created expectations, and these expectations also bring certain frustrations. And the plates, it was to remind the place where, also who was the politician that made this project not happen. And the 11 plates is still there. Well, the last time I was also, 3 disappeared. I think the bronze is also, it has a cost, and public space, I think, is, if something disappears, welcome. Anyway, the different changes of the master plan, it was made by economical and political reasons. I think what happened in certain places, especially in Latin America, with corruption, and I hope these things are changing with the new president, but it's still in the last years, 15 ministers they've been changing in Brazil. I think it's clear the corruption is still there. Part of the translation series is a series of sentences that I use as a leitmotif, and it's been installed and presented in different places, in different contexts, in relationship. This was a part of 5 windows for the Strasbourg Opera House. It has a kind of atrium, and it was the language of the 5 communities in Strasbourg: the French, the German, the Turk, the Portuguese. They are more living there. And other works, it was inserted in the media as a contribution, but in most of the times insert in a way than the sentence appear in context very diverse and very different. For me, that question, more than a question, a kind of a sentence, it tries to remind them that as much we get involved in something, better perception we get of the issue. This was on the entrance of the Spanish pavilion in Venice. In a way, I installed there because the old pavilion was dedicated to translation. I don't want to talk about nationality, countries, but more about issues of translation. And in a way, also emphasize the Biennale itself and how the Biennale, again, is a translated event. The sentence appeared in billboards, stickers, and in a different countries. And in Korea, it was interesting because we make a brainstorming to find the translation, and we don't arrive to any kind of consensus. Finally, it was 8 interpretations. They decided that 8 interpretations it was published and used. I couldn't evaluate myself. I mean, it was language I couldn't. They used in the context, in every context, elements that maybe are part of the city. For example, in this case, is for advertising, also for political campaigns. I think it's also a way to connect more with a certain kind of reality. Okay, the last two projects I go to talk, I think are more recent. ASIC Radio was in Istanbul. It was an invitation for 2 years. I think it was 6 artists that was invited from different parts of the world to work in Istanbul. We have 2 years and a budget to do a project, a public project. I spent the first year to research, interview, talking with people, and the second year, I think I have more clear what I want to do. Is one of the people I interviewed, he was the director of ASIC Radio, and I decided to work with ASIC Radio with them, for them, and with them. And this is something I repeat very much on the public space situation, that I think we needed to work not only for, but to work with. With the ASIC Radio was interesting because it's one of the few alternative and independent radios in Turkey. Turkey is a country with a lot of censorship, very controlled. The radio is very outspoken. It's surprisingly strange they exist. I worked with them and created 4 radio programs. And the 4 radio programs, one, it was about myth. I always think the myths are constructed inside of a context. The stereotype, they are built outside of the context. Then the cultural production in Istanbul, and then the 4th program about censorship. Like the 4 radio programs, it was taped and filmed, and the result of the project, it was a film where the radio programs give the certain part, of course, it was edited 40 minutes, but it nourished the program of the film. It was a program that's supposed to be on television as a big public, but they rejected. They rejected the for political reasons, and finally it's on the web. That in a way, I don't want to say it's better, but I think much more people have access. The program, working with them, it was a very good experience, and one of the things that's important of this experience is the radio station appropriate itself the work, and they feel like, because it's interviews with the people there, and they represent the radio, and they themselves is the one who use this film. And I think sometimes in the public space it's difficult these things happen because the problem is who receives that, who is using that, and how is appropriate that. When a work is appropriated by a community, I think is the best situation in a public project. Okay, construction of fear is a work that I've been working in the last years. I think generated maybe by consequences of September 11, but also I will say it was generated by invitation inside Tijuana, San Diego, the border. And that it was the first reaction or the first work for this series, where a film for 40 minutes on the border of Tijuana and San Diego, and also work for television. In this case, it was showing in San Diego and it was showing in Tijuana. It was the specificity of the public space project to be broadcast. And the work is about how the fear is translated in the border, the fear of the North versus the fear of the South, and vice versa. And this work, in a way, it originated another work. That is the work working in Tijuana. I was thinking, well, in Spain, it's a similar situation between Spain and North Africa. And then I produced the own translation Miedo Half, also broadcast in Spain and North Africa. And actually in North Africa it was interesting because Al Jazeera, that is the CNN for the Arab countries, take it. That is rare because normally they don't take it, the outside production. But it was a condition to be seen in the places, both sides of the border. In the case of the Spain and Africa project, it was longer to produce because the complexity is also larger. I think it's the fact that in that part of the world, the religion is an element that not necessarily in Tijuana, San Diego existed. You know, the religion is a main element in terms of the interpretation of the border between Tarifa and Tanger. That work generated a series of installation and reactions. That it was in Montreal, where I start to see that the fear by subtitles in the press in the last 3 years, the appearance and the visibility of the word fear, terror, panic, it was more and more present, and it was present on literature, on books. The industry of publishing started to create tabloids. It was immense production in the last years where the word fear appeared. I think it's a construction of fear, and it's an industry of fear. And in a way, I think it's a situation where I think slowly, I hope, by the constatation of so evident that it start to be evade and in a way disappear from the psychological situation of the individual. Part of the construction of fear is Alphabile Otros, is the work I like it to talk a little bit more in detail. Again, is Brazil. In this case, is Sao Paulo. But is Sao Paulo the suburbia areas of Sao Paulo, where I discovered working in the project that is a series of gate communities. It's called Alphaville. It's around 11 Alphavilles, 11 Alphaville 1, 2, 3, 11. Obviously, the first one, it was constructed in the 70s, and it was this idea to promise this kind of green world, the suburbia, to go to the nature, etc., etc. And that it was actually the slogan of the Alphaville when they was created. And actually, in a way, I make a parallelism that is the same slogan when Brasilia it was created. Brasilia was created a little bit under this slogan, as a dream. Then, working on the project of Alphaville as a gate community, I start to get intrigued why they use the word Alphaville. I talked with the entrepreneur of the people, the developer and he told me that the architect proposed to the developer, say the word, and that is the moment where Alphaville was. The developer say, well, Alpha Latin and Bill French, they will sell. And they decide to do for commercial reasons, but without any idea that this was a film. Anyway, the history of Alphaville, the film of Godard, as a kind of a futuristic city, but also an utopia, then I feel myself connected to other two films, and I think it's a kind of trilogy. That's very personal opinion, with A Stalker of Tarkovsky and La Jetée of Chris Marker, three films that are talking about a zone, an utopia, and I always see in relationship. But I wanted to share a little bit of the research I did versus the other works that I go much more into the description, to see that when I will start to work with the film, I see the gate community is a futuristic project about utopia, and the film is also, but one is about fiction and the other is about economics. And this image of Alphaville, you could see this kind of gate community that is many parts of the world, but in the case of Brazil, is emphasized to surveillance. And I think in Brazil, one of the things is incredible, the development of the industry of surveillance. One of the biggest industries of industries in Brazil is surveillance, control for cars, houses, condominiums, everything, individual. This it materialized very much in the gate communities, where you needed to identify, a process of going inside is like you go to Fort Knox. I mean, it's really like a totally under control, under surveillance. I explored very much and interviewed people for surveillance company, and I arrived to the conclusion that a lot of these companies that are in the hands of Colombian or Israelis is the two main experts on surveillance around the world. And as I say, it's more and more companies of surveillance that are active in Brazil. The Alphaville, I think it has, as I say, 11 residence parts. You could see that it has a certain kind of elements of where gates communities are, but in a way I feel that the sense of property and the sense of security give a very special way that remind me very much these medieval cities where everything is behind walls. Like that, the walls in Alphaville are surrounded this gate community. What is supposed to be a free, utopical space, it becomes totally like behind walls. Like that, behind walls to a certain situation, they become like a bunker. Anyway, this is part of the information on the securities and the different companies that I think that are part of the Alphaville, but also in a way it was no resort on the information. That was the plan for the installation. That it has well, part of the bibliography. The space has a series of slogans. The installation became like a showroom for selling condominiums, in a way. The green carpet, then it has these slogans. Then the kids around these showrooms are on Saturday and Sunday flying these banners to bring the people on the showrooms. And it has the wallpapers with all the advertising for property and condominium sales and covering all with keywords that I think are important as a part of the process of advertising. And the film then is what I got to show to finish this presentation.
Alphaville.
Il était 24h17, heure ossianique, quand j'arrivais dans les faubourgs d'Alphaville.
Alphaville é um mundo de qualidade, de segurança, de confiança, de certezas. Alphaville é um mundo de felicidade, um mundo feito de sonhos que a gente não vê a hora de transformar em realidade. Alphaville.
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 Vous venez des pays extérieurs, Monsieur Johnson?
Oui.
C'est comment les pays extérieurs?
Vous n'y êtes jamais allé?
Non. Autrefois, quand j'étais une petite fille, mon père me racontait comment c'était. Maintenant, il est défendu d'y penser.
Vous êtes né où?
Mais ici, je vous dis, à Alphaville.
O mais surpreendente lançamento residencial de São Paulo até o momento. O reflexo do seu melhor.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait?
Ils ont été condamnés.
Il n'y a que des hommes.
En général, il y a toujours 50 hommes exécutés à mort contre une seule femme.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait?
Ils ont agi de façon illogique.
Dans les pays extérieurs, ce n'est pas un crime? Alphaville.
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 Alphaville é um mundo de gente que ri, que chora de rir. Gente que cai da cama.
Il arrive que la réalité soit trop complexe pour la transmission orale.
Alphaville é um mundo verde, verde esperança. Esperança de que o futuro pode e vai ser muito, mas muito melhor.
Zéro 3 des pays extérieurs. Vous menacez la sécurité d'Alphaville.
Vous avez du feu.
Oui, j'ai fait 9000 kilomètres pour vous envoler.
Les hommes ordinaires sont indignes de la position qu'ils occupent dans le monde. En analysant leur passé, on est automatiquement conduit à cette conclusion. Il faut donc les détruire, c'est-à-dire les transformer.
Qu'est-ce que vous faites? Vous pleurez?
Puisque c'est défendu.
Il était 23h15, heure océanique, quand Natacha et moi sortîmes d'Alphaville par les boulevards périphériques.
Vous croyez qu'ils sont tous morts?
Non, pas encore. Ils vont peut-être guérir, d'ailleurs. Qu'Alphaville deviendra une cité heureuse comme Florence, comme Angoulême City, comme Tokiorama.
Sentiment que vous attendez que je vous dise quelque chose.
Oui. Faut y arriver toute seule. Alors vous serez sauvés. Si vous n'y arrivez pas, vous êtes perdus comme les morts d'Alphaville.
Okay, I think it's done for tonight. I know by the lectures here then is questions and answers. Okay, try to go through.
If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone.
Good, we finished early.
We have one.
Can you repeat the name of the three movies that were Alphaville, La Jetée, and what was the third one?
Tarkovsky, Stalker. Stalker by Tarkovsky.
Thank you.
Pretty much films that deal with, in a way, to, as I say, utopia and looking for a zone of ambiguity than I think the three, from the perspective of a Swiss, a French, and a Russian, different.
I had a question. I was wondering, in the translation series, the work that's made about the money and the currency, foreign currencies. What year was that made in? I'm really curious.
Well, it was an open proposition, that it was in a way to, like a partition of music, you know. In a way, it was an open proposition that I will not follow, but I know by traveling that the money, the moment you change, you lost money. But I think it was a contribution to the show and open to the audience.
What was the year?
Huh?
What year was the proposition offered?
That I think 90 is show in New York. I think it was 90. I don't know, 7. I think 97.
Hi. Sorry, everyone. I wonder if after so many decades of working, if you received a commission now, let's say a huge commission, open-ended, you had 10 years to work on it, what kinds of projects are you interested in?
Working now?
Yeah, what kinds of issues? Are they sort of similar to what you presented?
Yeah. Well, Construction of Fear, a variation, it will be showing in Paris of the Triennale in a week. But new works is the series of protocol. Then I start to be in Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo. I start to work that 3 years ago, but this will take me a long time, I think. I don't see the end of I think I'm in the period of research. But this is something interests me, because as I showed the image in the beginning, I do a version of protocol in Germany in 2005 at the Kunstbereich in Stuttgart, but that it was more the protocol from a European perspective, and the Asian, I think, is so complex by the interpretation and the way how also for me understand or not understand the language, then I make the things and relay myself on translation and an interpretation. Like that, it will be a long project. And variations of the on translation series for Caracas, Venezuela, and and works there. In general, working in Delta, several projects in different moments, in the same time, but in parallel. One in the beginning, or the middle, or the end. Normally, I never work only one project. Like that, you do the research of one, and the other is near to finish, and that's pretty much there.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on that pairing of the project and protocol. Is it suggesting that for you, projects and protocol-based thinking are sort of polar opposites almost, or that they characteristically lead to complementary or opposing outcomes, and that one is maybe a corrective for the other?
Well, I think it's I use in a way to describe a territory, the protocol in a way, is generated by conventions and rituals and formalization of rules that is been appearing in different territories, especially bureaucratic, administrative, but also political, medicine. In Germany, it's political. In France, it's medicine. In Spain, I would say protocol, it has to do diplomacy. Like that in every country. Like that this territory, for me, is like the kind of universe to observe, analyze, and using the project to try to comment on that, or analyze, or to deconstruct the work. That is more like one is the territory and the other is the methodology or the way of acting.
I had a question about the project, and I mean, in some ways, it's a question about a lot of the projects. But this, I'm curious about the how it is to operate in a site-specific way in a foreign country when a project is very research-based. For example, the project in I don't know if it was Rio or São Paulo, where you had the plaques commissioned to commemorate public works that were never realized. So I wondered how you are able to find out about these particular public works. Is you work with research assistants, or something you do over a longer period of time?
Yeah, I need to say that thank you for the question, because I think it's important to say that these works you don't do alone. You do with teams, and the team. I mean, I have one person working with me in New York and one in Barcelona. That they are very small teams, but the teams are created in the place where I work. That in Istanbul it was a team, Sao Paulo was a team. That part of the negotiation for the work is to the possibility of have created a team of work. And I like it to work with the place because in a way I nourish myself by the information and the knowledge of the place, the context. That the project in Istanbul, without working with a group in Istanbul, it will take him more 5 years in Istanbul too. And I think also it has to do with the economical situation. I think I cannot afford to create a group of, like maybe big studios of architecture or something like that, I prefer to work in a very, very, very flexible way, but in every project, I myself is the one I move in instant than the team, I don't know if I answer.
So interesting to see your work after having known you.
Huh?
It's so interesting to see this expanded presentation of your work, having been your student. And part of what I'm wondering is something really fundamental. How do you view the act of reflection and deconstruction of these protocols? Sometimes it seems as though they're from a personal perspective. At other moments, it seems as though there's a more sort of universal attempt to understand those systems. And in relation to that, how is it that you intend the audience to understand them? Is there a relationship between your understanding of those systems once you have investigated them and what you hope for the audience to understand once they see these instantiated works?
Well, I need to accept, as I said before, there are subjective decisions, But after many years of looking for objectivity, it was a decision for that project I mentioned before to work on. But I work what I call critical subjectivity. And I wrote a text in '78 about. I never write long text because I'm much more working visuals. But this was one of the projects. I always write a text for every project, declaration of intention. And it drives me to go into the project in certain direction. That critical subjectivity, it was related to the unsubjective project, and it was to declare this accepting of subjectivity from a critical perspective. To say that you could consider that is not the no existence of objectivity, but the existence of a series of intersubjectivity, of the amount of people created a series of subjectivity that could create a critical subjectivity. That in a way, it's personal, but always with a sense, try to don't lose the sense, the critical view on the subject. And this is part also the fact that you're working with a team and you have dialogue and you have discussions. I think that also helps very much to understand. And in order to communicate that to an audience, for example, I was mentioned the stadium that changed in every place, giving reference that are personal but also local. It helps to a certain way to not only local, is always interrelated with international or more universal, but to have points of reference where people could connect. I think I always feeling that it was part of the work. No? Mm-hmm. It has the two sides. No?
I'm sure it's happened, but do you ever get reactions that are completely different interpretations than the one that you had understood of something like the stadiums, the columns?
Yeah, it's changing software and it's changing the space, the scale, but pretty much with the same structure. Mm-hmm. You know? That has a structure, but the structure it could vary. You know, and it changed the name of the language of the country. I think titles for me are important, and because I think it's also and the put in the language where it's originated.
I have a question related to something that you mentioned about alternative spaces. And I was wondering if you could say something more about that in terms of development, and then in relation to that, how you see the shift in what's taken place in the past years into this biennial direction.
The switch from...
Well, how you see it, because you mentioned both of them together. You mentioned about alternative spaces being kind of nurturing sort of spaces, and then the biennials.
Well, I'm not considering, I participate in many biennales, I'm not considering a prototype, a biennale person. And I think it's much more biennales around the world now. But I think it's clear that the alternative spaces, it was a need, that artists, we decide to create it and build. And I think it was part of the moment in New York, very generous moment, the 70s, early 70s, 71, 72, where the community was not very big. Everybody goes to the concerts of Steve Reich or Phil Glass, so everybody comes to your thing. It was like the community of the kitchen, of the artist space, and that. It was a very, very generous situation where maybe, I don't know, 5,000 people or 2,000 people. And of course, that is difficult now. I don't think in New York is a kind of such community. I think it's even Brooklyn is not such community. I think it's pretty much, well, this is another thing. But what I mean is that this thing, it was a need and it was very important where people decide to build that situation. Then the Biennale is created by the alternative space. It was created from below. The other, it was created from high. You know? It's institutional. The Venice Biennale, how it was created, the Venice Biennale, I researched a lot on that. It was a decision of the mayor of Venice, created with a group of artists in the Café San Florian in San Marco Piazza, to decide that international fairs happen in Chicago, happen in Belgium, happen in that, the international fairs of inventions and that. Why we don't do an art fair in an international fair about art? But this was a decision of a political decision. And then he connected many other countries, etc. But the first Biennale was kind of local, and then increasing start to be, and every year is more and more countries. I think it's interesting that the Giardini is no more space, and then all the Venice is surrounded by the. But I think it's a phenomenon that it has to do with the 80s very much. Not Venice, Sao Paulo, the first Biennales, but the increment of Biennale is about the extension of the system of art, the roles, the power of these roles, and see for many countries and cities that culture, it could be part of energized tourism. Like that, if you analyze phenomena like Guggenheim Bilbao, and you analyze the Biennale in certain countries, similar effect, you know, to try to energize certain situation of like that. In certain countries, I think the Biennales make sense. I think in Istanbul makes sense, in Havana makes sense, because there are people with missing information. And I think it's good to get that, but I think it's still the model useful for certain contexts. But at the moment it becomes part of the spectacle, I think it was really, in some places it don't make much more sense.
A quick question. Hola. Quick question, or not quick, but a question reflection. Can you talk a little bit about the change in your position as an artist, as a practicing artist, in the kind of process of observation of reality and hopefully transformation of reality that you see may have happened through your projects? For example, the project on fear. You know, in which ways you see this conversation that you had in Tijuana and in the border, you know, contribute to that conversation about fear, or an attempt to resolve the question of fear, if that would be possible, or in the kind of on the last film that you show in Alphaville, in which ways this project, you know, that comes from your observation and the connection that you make of kind of a reality in São Paulo and the film, in which ways do you see that translating to perhaps actions, you know, transformative actions in the public imagination of those two worlds, let's say? Mm-hmm. How do you see that happening through your work?
I think it would be very pretentious to think that artists we could change and solve things. I think we contribute to inquire, discussion. I mean, I think it's important to propose alternatives. I think two projects I don't speak today, Cadaqués Canal Local and Barcelona Distrito in the 70s, it was alternative to television local television as alternative of political one chain in Spain official, or the file room, I feel it was also an alternative. But in general, I think the works, they are more to create a certain kind of inquire and questioning and critical understanding. I think to see this project as solving problems, I think I will say, I couldn't think, we couldn't talk from the perspective of art to be effective. I think we are trying to be thinking and critical and thoughtful, but that
perhaps with the word solving perhaps is not the right one. Perhaps the question is, in the process of bringing awareness about some of these issues, do you expect not a solving of a problem, but do you expect a certain response, specifically in the project about fear?
No, this is totally, that's another thing, because the fact is these works, they become public through broadcast, and I don't think this project, their attempt to be showing it's trying to have like a larger public situation. And with the public works, sometimes it's a kind of paradigm, I think, or paradox, than more people seeing, but less feedback you have. That's in the art world, in the galleries, you have feedback because you have articles, you have magazines, you have people seeing the work, you have immediate. At the moment it's public, you put a film on TV, many people see it, let's see. Or in the street, many people see it. I do a project, it was the Limousine project in New York, and it was for 4 months. He was present in the city of New York all the time. And people ask me, what was your feedback? Because you don't do sociology of your own work. But the minute people see it. That I think is a kind of paradox. As much public, less response.
Nowadays, we have become a world of spectacle more than at any moment in history, but also we are spectators. How do you negotiate what to keep, what to censor, or what to show?
How to negotiate?
Yes. How do you decide? There are so much information that are accessible to you as to everyone else, and which one you choose to keep, and which one you choose to remove, and how is that? Is this decision conscious or completely unconscious?
Well, the project starts, most of them, by curiosity. Every project to know more about something, because if you dedicate to 2, 3, or 4, or 5 years to something, you start to know better something. Like that, I think is a starting point, curiosity. And curiosity about a subject, to know more. And the decisions on the project, as I said before, is a period of research. And the research I consider very important, because to know what exists, what other people thinking, what kind of information, etc., etc. And I think that process, I think, is important. And then around one moment that the decisions, they are personal decisions. That, as I said before, I try to keep it a certain kind of critical perspective, but are finally, you couldn't, considering that this is something they don't have objective or universal understanding. think it needs to be seen and perceived as a kind of voice, and like the same subject, it could have many other voices. What do you think? I think, let's go. Huh? Okay. Well, the next one we will pay.
Along those same lines, you seem to have filtered an aspect, an available approach from your work. It seems absent. I'm not saying it's good or bad that it's absent. That aspect being the natural world, say natural protocols, natural spaces. Is that more a manifestation of where your interests take you, or has there been some deliberation in what I perceive as that exclusion?
When you say natural, what are you talking about?
Phenomenon without, specifically without human agency at its core.
Well, I will say that for a period of time interests me the media, and I devote a lot of works to that. It still interests me as I say, landscape. I think it's as another landscape that I think is real. I feel if you talk about the other landscape, the window, I left for the painters. I think it's an history of representation already. I will say that it's an ironical commentary. I mean, I look at the window too. But what I mean is I try to see, and I think the translation series, when I'm talking about filters, is the same way. I think it's a mediated element of, it seems like some things that are more visible, and other things that are more invisible, and they are more mediated and much more translated. That's the ones that interest me more. And of course, it could be pretentious to say, try to make visible the invisible, but as a curiosity, I'm looking more for that situations and this kind of moments than I think is that less clear. No?
Okay, well, thanks very much. And I just wanted to mention before closing that we have one more lecture in the series. Michael Eng, philosopher, is going to be speaking in the next event. I believe the date is 22nd. Yeah, another Monday. Hope you'll all come. And thank you very much, Antoni, for illuminating us.
Thank you.
and hope to see you around. Thank you.